For the last panel before dinner, it's either that this panel is excellent, which is what I'd like to believe, or free dinner is something that Peak Bangalore never misses. Either way, we are clearly in the way between you and dinner, so we'll get straight into it. I, unlike Kamya, was not asked to say anything, but everyone in the room who knows me knows that if you give me a mic, I can't resist. So I'm going to basically set the stage for what we're going to discuss. I really wanted to have a cage match style battle between proprietary AI and open source AI. That's not going to happen. As you can see, we're very much team open source AI on stage. So I'm going to start by sort of setting out perhaps what the contours of this battle is. We all loved this ChatGPT moment that happened when suddenly we had this really miraculous chatbot that would answer pretty much anything that we threw at it in very interesting, mysterious ways. They would give us things back in the style of Shakespeare and in a limerick. And the concern that people started to express was that this particular form of delivery of AI, miraculous as it is largely controlled by entities that are opaque and don't really provide the nuts and bolts of how this miraculous thing works. And there was a pushback from a community of builders that said, we've got to be more transparent with what we build. And then the proprietary guys came up and said, but this is an extremely dangerous technology. And you've got to trust the safety of that technology to people who really understand how it works. And so that, in a sense, is where this stage is set. And since there's no proprietary AI person on stage, I'm going to just say, I'm going to aim this at Melinda and Kishore to start with. What's so good about open source AI that the proprietary guys, first of all, are the proprietary guys right? Is this a more dangerous way to build AI? And what's the benefit? Everyone's free right now. I mean, you don't have to do ChatGPT Plus, but you can get a lot out of ChatGPT. So it can't be price. So what's so good about it, and why is it not as dangerous as the proprietary guys tell us? Can I start with you, Melinda, and then over to you, Kishore?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll come on from... Yeah.
Okay, I see. Thanks for the question. So I'm from Meta, and just to set a little context, I'm sure folks are aware of our Llama family of models, but we've been releasing variations of our Llama model every few months for the past year, 2 years. And so our most recent in July, we released the largest frontier open model in July, and then in September we released some variations on the model that are smaller and that are multimodal. And so we have now a family of models that can be used in a variety of ways for different purposes. To your specific question, I think the safety argument, or the safety argument, the idea that open models are less safe is false, and it's a bit of a distraction and a red herring, which is not to say, just to be clear, that we shouldn't take safety seriously. We do take safety seriously in the development of our Llama family of models, in the resources that we provide for developers. We provide safeguards that developers can build with. We provide responsible use guide, transparency tools, research papers. Everything you want to know about the model, you can know about the model and develop it on it responsibly. So safety is important, but is not the only factor. And this is where we get to the upsides. And I think, obviously, we are all in on open source, and we think there are just tremendous upsides to it. So to level set, we are not a company that is going to AI is not our business model, right? Unlike some closed companies, they are making money by selling AI. We are not. And so, but we do have an interest, a meta interest in developing AI. We don't want to be closed into someone else's proprietary system. We want to retain optionality. So it is very important for us to support and develop the ecosystem based on our model, right? Those benefits flow back to us. If people are building on our models, they are developing improvements, they are identifying risks, identifying other aspects of the model that we should be aware of, that all flows back to us and we can make improvements. So it's like Android, right? We want to be the operating system essentially for AI. But beyond that, I think it's important to just say that because people want to know, well, what's in it for Meta? But beyond that, I think, a lot of developers in the room, right? I think what we hear consistently, what is important to developers is that ability to customize, to be able to add data, to be able to fine tune, to be able to build for the very specific contexts and applications that are relevant in your communities, your countries. And that level of customization is what really makes open source so powerful. And then beyond that, for society, there's a lot of benefits. So you talked about competitive aspects. So open source enables anyone to build with a little expertise and some resources, but largely allows anyone to build on a world-class model, right? You don't need a lot of compute, you don't need a lot of high-powered resources, you just grab it and go. That enables a range of folks to benefit from the model who normally price would be a barrier. They'd be priced out. And then with that comes other knock-on benefits. So in addition to enabling competition in the marketplace, it allows innovation to speed more quickly. Not everyone is starting from zero. People are starting from 100 and then building. And then beyond that is the economic development that comes with that innovation. So I think it's really if you call it a stack of benefits of open source from our company to developers to society at large, not to mention, of course, just the digital development knock-on benefits that come globally in the global south.
So, Kishore, I'm going to move to you on pretty much the same question because you're also, as a company, very you bought into this idea of open. But more from the innovation, collaboration, democratization perspective, why does this allow you to do that? Just to say that you can still use many of the proprietary models to do a lot of these things. And so what's sort of the added advantage of this?
Sure. So firstly, pleasure talking to you all. Good evening. So firstly, I think like you began with saying, there's been this debate about one monolith versus open for a while. And mostly the ecosystem seems to be settling for more open. And also, no conference ever starts in AI without speaking about the opportunity and the trade-off. And good to see that India is probably considering, taking the opportunity route while beginning to look at risks and how to mitigate risk. Now, in that context, I think more or less the policy group agrees that we're looking at, regulating the risks in a certain way, where we speak of precision regulation, where we speak of adopting responsible AI with a focus on safety, trust, and governance. And broadly, I think we're also mostly agreeing to how developer and deployer and distributor responsibilities get plugged. Now, the beauty of open source is, if not all, several of these concepts can be well managed in an open source community. We believe if you put a model and a solution in front of more bodies and more eyes looking at it, the chances are that the model is safer, right? So that's fundamentally what I think about it. Now, at IBM, we've had a reasonably long history of supporting open source. I mean, Linux and Java and what have you. And I think transformational technologies like the internet and whatever have benefited from open source. And AI being such a transformative opportunity in itself, we strongly advocate for open. Now, as we say we advocate for open, at multiple layers, we are practicing adoption of open. For example, today at IBM, the Watson X uses a lot of open source tools and technologies. The Watson X platform hosts whole host of our partner open source models. Now, beyond that, we're also engaged in developing the open community. I think in December last year, Meta, us, and 50 other organizations signed up the OpenAI Alliance. I'm glad to get it to your notice that earlier this month, we brought that to India as the India chapter. And we've had folks like Sarvam, IIT Jodhpur, IIT Chennai, Infosys, and a few other come together. So I think the ecosystem is building up, and we will see a whole host of more traction as we go on that will allow us to answer some of the fundamental questions that I brought about earlier. And not only that, I think we're also coming together to work with governments to see how the benefits of open source can be reached to the ecosystem. In fact, later last year, October last year, we signed some agreements with the government of India to make Watson X available through CDAC to all of the community, and that's work in progress. So those are ways we are demonstrating how the benefits of open could reach to all. That said, of course, like Melinda was beginning to say, open brings down the barriers to entry. It creates a more competitive marketplace. It allows for entrepreneurs to consider local context and focus on solutions rather than looking at models and so on and so forth, the time to market, especially for Global South, where I think one of the previous speakers eloquently spoke of barriers that we're hitting in terms of language and what have you can easily be solved. So I think that those are benefits that open source truly bring. That apart, I think open source also democratizes model making, right? I mean, last month, Red Hat, which is an IBM company, and us, we announced an initiative called Expert Labs, where, conventionally you would have to take a model, fork it, train it on your data, but the fork remains. But here is a program where, people are invited, they can come and contribute their skill, their knowledge, and they can have a model by itself. So those are significant benefits that, open source brings. Of course, happy to kind of chat more. Thank you.
There's a bunch in there that I want to unpick, but I want to give everyone the opportunity to make sort of opening remarks. And I want to turn to you, Mike. You've been variously described as the CTO of the UK, and so you have very much, a good friend of yours has told me that you are the CTO of the UK. And as someone in the public sector, how does this open versus closed issue play out? I would imagine that the public sector would be happy to take an open source version over a proprietary version. At least that's what every government says. But just in terms of the real trade-offs that you have to, as a public official deal with, price, economics versus social impact, how would you think about that? And you promised you'd be controversial, so we've got to wake the audience up.
Thank you. Thank you, Rahul. And thank you for the invitation to Rudra, Carnegie, everyone here. I wasn't the CTO, I was the head of the technology profession for the UK government and the head of the first digital unit and the first chief data officer for the UK. So technically not a CTO.
I don't know, Mike. That sounds pretty CTO-ish to me.
That was enough. I guess you asked me about how does this, I'm going to try and answer the question, how does this feel for policymakers? I work at Public Digital. We're a consultancy. We help governments, large institutions, global institutions, some private, some public, with digital transformation at scale. So we advise politicians, and with Havashi and others here, help people like Macron and others with sort of grappling with these issues. So there's no sort of easy answer to some of this. How do I feel about it? Or I feel old is how I feel about it. And in all the hype and all the change, I think it's important to think from a policymaker's point of view, what's changed and what's not changed. How do I feel about open versus proprietary? Well, I think it's a false dynamic. We were discussing earlier, it's about 60 years since the first antitrust case split up IBM from its software and hardware business. I was reading just before that the US regulator might try again with Google. It feels like nothing changes. I think it's a false premise that we're trying open source. Like, we're not, in my opinion. I'm with Christine Peterson. If you want a definition of open source, we have one. It's been valid for 30 years. This is not open source. If you want to be open, you open up the weights, the models, the data, a lot. I'm not convinced. I would be convinced, happily be so. I'm not yet convinced that that the potential threat of a bad actor is a good enough reason not to do that. I've not seen any evidence of that's the case. I would happily look at it if it were open. I recognize the slight problem with that statement, that you'd have to do it first. So my advice to policymakers really is to firstly have a long think about what is open. Last time I talked to Pramod in the summer, if we had one in the UK, I can't remember. It was raining again. My view of DPI and openness was that this is relatively small in terms of cost, modular. The Indian experience would come today with the hyperscalers, the US government, and so on. There's a changing characteristics of there. I've been around long enough to remember many companies, some here on this stage and elsewhere, lobbying aggressively against open source. I've had some of those people apologize for their conduct about that lobbying, the securocrat industry, telling governments never to adopt open source. Bill Gates was at it in 1976 with a letter to the hackers. Steve Ballmer called it a benign cancer just, a little while ago. We have to remember this. This is an ahistorical issue. The idea that there's some sort of massive inflection point now and everything's new is not the case. One of the choices we face is to really double down on a sort of centrist, large platform view of the world with all the attendant surveillance issues that come with that. That's not necessarily wrong or bad, but I think we have to look at it as it is, not as we would like it to be. So my advice to policymakers is really, think hard about that. In G7 countries, I'll take the UK as an example, most policymakers actually don't have the freedom that policymakers in the South have. And the reason is that the environment they work in is not open. I'm with Fran Bennett from the Ada Lovelace Institute, and she defines AI at the moment as mostly DevOps most of the time, because that's what you actually have to do. And most policymakers I talk to in G7 countries are dealing with closed proprietary legacy systems. And they don't actually have the freedom to act that we might think they do. I think policymakers in the South, by definition of not having the legacy, not having the money, they have and Pramod's shown this, you have a huge freedom to act. And my advice would be cautious about that freedom. It's not an easy answer. You know that. There is a Faustian pact to be made here. But there's a huge, huge opportunity. India's shown the way. I am massively optimistic about India's ability to demonstrate what good public policy can be in this space. But to give you an idea of, a final point I'd say to policymakers is, follow the money. We looked recently at some numbers from Gartner. If you take the sort of, I don't know what the right phrase is these days, but China, Western Europe, North America, out of the equation. They spend about $250 per person per year on government spending on technology. The rest of the world gets 14. You don't get much money for that. If you want to equalize that this year, just for 1 year, you've got to find $1.3 trillion. That's 7x more than the global contribution from all the international agencies. So that's not going to happen. The legacy play can't work, which means that there just simply isn't the money to do that. You know that. So the question for policymakers is, what degree of open do you want? Do you really want open source? Do you want this sort of pretend open source, half open that we've got now, which got a load of benefits, by the way. It's good, but we have to really have that debate, and there has to be some money behind that debate to understand the value of it. There isn't a business case model for these things for public policy officials. I wish there were. So it's going to be really important that we work it out. One thing anyone who predicts the future in this space is a fool, and I'm not going to try and do that. But one thing I do know is that I'd put money on that, a more successful model of that prediction coming from the South and the North right now. Is that controversial enough?
Not as much as I know you can be, so I'm going to give you a second bite of the cherry. But I'm going to first, since you already pivoted the conversation away from just open source to open source for the Global South, I'm going to move to Junei, because you've got a report out on AI governance or governance of AI in the Malaysia.
Process.
Well, okay. Well, then you can give us a sneak peek of what the findings are in Malaysia. But if you could just extend it more to the Global South and how that would benefit.
Okay, so I'm Jun Yi. I'm a senior research associate from Khazanah Research Institute, a policy think tank in Malaysia. And I work in the digital and tech policy team, and I focus on AI governance. So I'm going to first talk about how Malaysian stakeholders look at AI risk, which I think pretty much probably does extend to other global South country players as well. And then after that, circle back into the open source AI piece, right? So for that, I'll have to talk a little bit about our AI impact and governance study that we started this year, and we're going to publish a paper on it by the end of this year. And during the study, we talked to 21 key stakeholders within the Malaysian AI policy scene, covering government actors, also private sector and the CSOs, academia. And just to provide a bit of context about Malaysian AI landscape, we're 23rd on the government AI readiness index. And we have an AI strategy, and we're also opening up a national AI office in November. So the actors are anxious about the situation, really. And so for this study, we asked them three main questions. One is, what is AI risk to you? The second is, what do you see as governance challenges? And the third is, what do you see as feasible pathways forward? So I'm just going to focus on the AI risk piece. And through these conversations that we had with our 21 key stakeholders, we kind of came up with a typology of sorts, so three buckets of main ways that people consider AI risk. And so the first one is really the risk of not adopting AI. So the risk of, or not adopting AI quick enough. So this will cover, the fear of being left behind, the fear of losing out on the economic opportunities, or even, health benefits and all that. And second would be the problem of unsafe AI, unintended consequences of AI. So that doesn't really cover intent. So it's just really how bad design and not thinking far enough would bring you some certain risks that are connected with AI. And thirdly would be with bad intent, right? Weaponization of AI for criminal use or AI in warfare and things like that. So these are the three main buckets of AI risks that come up over and over again in our conversations with the stakeholders. But there's also this other bucket also, which is more a fundamental thing. When we talk about AI risk, there's a bucket of conversations that is not so much directly AI risk, but more on the lack of readiness to deal with these risks. Right? So if you're not ready, you won't be able to adopt the technology well enough, right, to reap the benefits. If you're not ready, you won't be able to deal with the consequences of unsafe AI or innate tech risks or systemic risks that comes from inequality, problems with democratic processes that are being affected, just unintended consequences. And thirdly, on how to really look at bad actors within the scene. If you're not ready, you're not going to be able to handle those. So to break it up even into smaller pieces of the readiness piece. So there is the need for governance structures and regulatory frameworks. Of course, we do have existing frameworks, but they have to be tweaked to be fit for purpose. And given that AI and AI governance is cross-border, so that also is something of a readiness problem. How do we actually now go global in our advocacy in where we want AI to be? And secondly, you can talk about capacity. We not only lack the technical capacity, but also the legal capacity or the social scientific capacity at both the human resources level, the talent level, and also at the state level, right? Because you need policymakers and bureaucrats and all of that to be able to handle what's coming, given the impacts of AI. And then there's also, of course, awareness of what AI is, awareness of the risks that come with AI, and then lastly, resources, right? For us to coordinate and for us to meaningfully make something out of AI, we will need computational resources, we'll need money, really. So that is just to give you like a framework of how countries from the global south can consider AI risk. And using Malaysia as a case. And then going back to open source AI, right? So I agree with Mike on the definitions, but I'm just gonna have a general piece about this on how if you look at open foundational models, there's gonna be like 5 distinct properties that leads both to risks and opportunities. So I'm just going to read from this list that I copied from the Model Openness Framework paper by White et al., which looks at broader access as being a risk or opportunity, greater customizability, local adaptation and inference ability, inability to rescind model access, and inability to monitor or moderate model usage. So I think that that's broadly, what we can agree on that are so-called benefits or risks that will come from these properties of open source.
Was like in Jerry Maguire, you had me at hello. It was the first thing that you said was so evocative of the global south, which is the risk of not participating in AI. That I think just resonates all over. And just to illustrate that, I want to bring Saurabh, because if there is ever an example of quick off the ropes, what is it? I don't know. Quick to start was what Saurabh built when he was at OpenAI, and I really want you to talk about now the use cases, because everyone says India is the use case capital of AI. And how open fits into that framework. But I don't know how many in the audience know about Jugalbandi. Maybe just very briefly talk about that and then also what you're building in.
Right. I think, as Mike said, there's a spectrum of open source. And what we call open source is most likely like open weights in that sense, right? Like, so let me put a contour to it, right? The license around some of these models are fairly permissive, allowing you to use it for a lot of use cases, right? As a company, what we do is we focus a lot on voice. We focus a lot on knowledge worker productivity. And one of the core charters of our organization is to build sovereign AI. Your data, your compute, your GPUs, right? So this is the contours of my work, right? Now, what Rahul was talking about is Jugalbandi, something that I had a chance to build during my not-for-profit life. And within 1 week of launch of ChatGPT, we had created a WhatsApp bot which could use open source voice models built by Indian academia, which works with ChatGPT, works off of the knowledge base of government schemes, and now suddenly a farmer in Haryana can ask questions like, I want to build a house, how can government help me? Right? So what you have done is you have probably taken all these search requirements and everything to having like need-based search, and for the farmer it is essentially talking to like an agent, but the kind of impact that it would have on the lives of a lot of people in India who still survive on welfare and whose potential can significantly be unlocked by use of these technologies, right? So this is something that we had built, and we were able to ship it out, like we built it practically in a day. right? Like, so that's how fast we were able to sort of like ship it out. And then we have seen like adaptation of similar technology. Retrieval augmented generation has become a very, very common technique 2 years down the line. And now you also have a lot of alternates to ChatGPT when you're building some of these voice models, right? So when we think about these open source models in the global south context, I mean, by global south, right? Like in any context for that matter, right? You can take bunch of these models, and the unique opportunity that India provides is that we need to be able to deploy it to 1.4 billion people, right? Now, if you need to deploy it to 1.4 billion people, you cannot rely on a proprietary model. One, because economics is not going to work out, right? There is no government budget line item that's going to have that much amount of money, right? So you need to have control over models. And why do you need control over those models, right? Because once you have control over those models, you can prune it, you can optimize it, you can ensure that it can be served at a very, very low cost with very, very low latency to a really large number of people at a cost point where the services costs go down, right? This is not just to say that the welfare is going to become easy, right? Like Indian enterprises deals with like millions of people, right? Like there are very few geographies which provides you with an opportunity to be interacting with your end customers, like of the scale of like, you know, a couple of million people every day, right? And now think about those organizations. For businesses to work very, very effectively, they need to be talking to Indians in their language, right? Like, so as a company, if I speak English, right? Like I can't be explaining my distributor who is probably a Telugu speaking person, right? Like that this is what needs to be done. And that's why you need multilingual models, right? Now, a bunch of these models, which are off-the-shelf open source available, right? They do not have very good multilingual capability. Now, imagine if you had proprietary systems, right? The onus on improving on language would lie on that organization. Now, because you have open weights model, organizations like Servam and many others are able to gather a lot of data which is otherwise not available on internet, improve on these models, serve applications at a very, very low cost to a really large number of Indians. And that's why when we think about like the opportunity and the risk, right? Like I think India has lapped onto the opportunity side of things. With the very clear acknowledgement that there are risks associated, and that's why we have a lot of focus on guardrails, we have a lot of focus on security, and very honestly, right, like let me share an example actually, because that's what we wanted to talk. So when we started doing one of the initial pilots of having these voice bot models served to domestic workers in Bangalore, served to waste pickers in Bangalore, right? Like really going after the end line in some sense, right? We had very interesting observations. So this was a government scheme bot. Obviously, like people were very, very happy, and the women reacted very differently, right? So contrary to the larger belief, women actually found these systems to be much more private, because in the absence of AI technology, they would otherwise have to rely on their husbands, their children, for them to even understand that there's a scholarship scheme for their daughters, right? So one, how people react to these technology is very, very different. But at the same time, once they know that there's a government scheme, the next thing that they want is like, don't send me to that line to apply for it. And the moment you say that, what you have to do is you have to bring all the government machinery on that mobile phone so that this person does not have to move and still can enjoy the government benefit. Now think about what is the data that's flowing in, right? So you have to bake in security, you have to bake in a lot of guardrails, you have to scope down what you are trying to do. But all of this is possible because you have open weights model, which otherwise would have taken a couple of $1 million for us to build. Now we are able to leverage that, we have a leg up on those side of things, and we are able to customize it to our need, right? So this sovereignty that my data, my compute, my GPU, is a need across India, right? Like from people who need welfare the most, to the enterprises, to the governments who are probably again serving those people, right? So I think that's how we see this play out.
So, Mike, I want to come back to you because what Saurabh is talking about, since he's talking so much about AI and a lot of what we've discussed over the last 2-3 days is, the hyperscalers are in the room. Do we need to use hyperscalers to push this out? I think, Meta AI is available to everyone. You can go to Meta AI and use it. So this is the use case of the big AI platforms seem to be very different from the use case of government, which has to be smaller and more modular. And I just want to see if that resonates with you and what your thoughts are around, open in that context, and is that as flexibly applicable to government?
I don't think, yeah, it's not an either-or, because that approach really, I think, helps governments get closer to solving public policy issues that are localized, more context, and have local flavor than any other approach. In doing so, I think you need a wide variety of providers, both whether it's all the way up from compute, data, services, applications, the lot. The inherent problem is that the bias in any system is compounded hugely when you're using platform services all the time. So, the largely, white platform way. And I understand that to some degree, but that sort of technological determinism, I just fundamentally disagree with that. We've got to not see the future platform structures of this stuff as an oligopoly. That's just not going to help in the long term. So, as I said before, I think the opportunity...
Own definition in, from time immemorial. So could you unpack that a bit for us? What really do we mean by this open word that we're now associating as opposed to proprietary AI?
Yeah, we make our model weights available. We don't make our training data and our code widely available. And so then we're not, I think it's a larger conversation which needs to happen, which is specifically around what are the gradients? What exactly is possible from fully proprietary and closed to fully open? There are different solutions for different problems.
Personal data. Of course, when you go to a closed proprietary model, I think I don't know if it's easier to address these things, but I would imagine that there are additional complexities with an open model that's now out in the wild. I guess with warts and all, it's now being used. So I don't know if, Kishore, you want to pick that one up. Are there any differences and nuances in the way in which, and just to throw another one in there, and either Melinda, you or Kishore can pick it up, is just this thing about open source and the geopolitical risk that people are thinking is attributed to it, which could see some sort of a lockdown on exporting these models. So
kind of add on to that. So fundamentally, I think the biggest challenge for adoption of AI of any sorts is the pace at which it's moving and the pace at which regulations are trying to catch up. So that remains at the core of the issue, right? There are, of course, known issues like licensing that you brought up. But hindsight, when you look at it, I still look at open as a way to truly mitigate some of the challenges that closed may have, especially from a security perspective. Now, closer home, if you look at how some countries like, let's say, Singapore have addressed it. So there is this, Verify AI consortium in Singapore, which has folks like IBM, Microsoft, Google, and who have you. And now they're beginning to look at how to set up testing, how to set up standards, and so on and so forth. Now, those benefit sets are far more to accrue than some of these risks. That'll be my thought, but invite Melinda to kind of add on.
So do you want to take that or
dig into the export
control?
Well, just real quick on the regulation.
US on risk versus opportunity, and risks seem to overweigh opportunity, but the Global South, having spent a lot of time here, sees the opportunity being worth some greater level of risk, perhaps, than the West is willing to take. And I just wondered, which is right? And, as Mike says, both have their place. But do you, in your research, feel that there is...
The results from 35 responses, very, very, unrepresentative, was that people were most concerned about unsafe AI, unintended consequences. So take what you will from that. And I think that we need to recognize that the Global South is a very heterogeneous and diverse group of countries, and within which is a very heterogeneous and diverse set of communities with different priorities and...
Perhaps lacks some of the context that is needed in the Global South. And I wondered whether you could just spend a little time talking about context and the role that open or proprietary AI context plays in the context of open or proprietary AI.
I was writing something very different.
You can say that as well. It's fine.
No, I think there are a couple of things that I want to say before I take this one, right? Like one, I think you won't be able to apply retrospective export regulations on open source models. It'll be very hard to go back and like stop people from using what is available out there on torrent.
I agree with that. But look, at some point in time, the models that are export controlled, if we go down that path, will be the models you want to use. And if that happens, it is a serious problem. So I agree, you can't retrospectively do it. So we're happy with the 405 billion parameters.
Beginning of ChatGPT era, to so to say, right? Like we have seen TI Dubai build foundational model Falcon. We have seen Mistral coming out of France, right? Like so, there are a lot of other countries who are building foundational model. India has its own foundational model, Servam 2 billion parameter model, built completely using Indian resources by India from scratch, right? So what we are focusing on is securing ourselves in that sense. Having said that, I think when we look at building some of these models, these are like enormously expensive, technically very hard to achieve kind of a thing. And that's why we look at it from like a purpose-built perspective, so to say, right? So I just wanted to make a distinction that we are talking about frontier models, right? Like where you would apply export regulations very differently, where you might restrict them already closed models to not have APIs being served in certain countries and things like that.
Models that are being released can significantly run on very simple hardware. We do not really have to have complex hardware. We do not have to invest a lot of money on hardwares. A lot of meta models that have been released, I think, can run on smartphones as well. Right? So in a scenario like that, we give people or developers the opportunity, some set of developers the opportunity to use it not in the right manner. So how is open source community regulating that? Would developers be regulated as well? Should we expect something like some social security number thing for developers so that, I'm just thinking out loud, so that these things are not used in the wrong way.
Sustainable.
We
have no.
So resource. Yeah.
Semiconductor as the property, because an atom has an electronic configuration to exhibit semiconductor property.